Comedy Central and Jimmy Kimmel. Apparently he also has 3 nipples. So I'm really excited for him to crack some jokes tonight. And I'll let him take it from here. Thank you.
Yeah. Showing the 3rd nipple. All right. How are we doing? How are we doing, Michigan? Good. Excited to be here. It's such an exciting seminar. We're talking about microdosing. We're talking about the risks, the benefits, and the unknowns. And I don't know too much about microdosing. I've actually never microdosed. I've macrodosed a few times. And I've gotten close to an overdose once, but that's another story. I was doing some research on microdosing. I found that some of the benefits, it helps with anxiety and depression. And I was like, really? Doing drugs every day helps with anxiety and depression? And I looked up the drugs, and I was like, oh, I've been doing the wrong drugs. Complete wrong drugs. It was like LSD, shrooms, MDMA. I was like, I've dabbled a little bit. I was actually on an EDM cruise recently. I was performing. Yeah, if you don't know what EDM is, it stands for ecstasy-dependent music. Yeah, that's great. It was a good time. It was a good time. Did a little bit of ecstasy on the cruise. I never felt music in my anus before. That was the first. It was 24 hours of EDM and hearing people's bad decisions. It was a good time. Just 24 hours of hold my hair, Courtney. What's up, Courtney? That was the whole trip. It's great. It's fun. I enjoy EDM music. It's fun. I noticed a rhythm with it where there was like it was always a little breakdown. It was always a build-up, like a. Then there was a pause to remind you that you're on drugs, and then the beat would drop, and I was like, they should say something in the pause. You're clearly on LSD, you're clearly on Molly. They should reassure you, right? They should say something. It should be like, hey man, it's cool, nobody notices you trying to make out with that fridge. It should be every song. I'll tell you guys about the time that I tried psychedelics for the first time, accidentally. I was at a party in Los Angeles, and I should have known my friend was on psychedelics. I showed up at the party saying weird stuff like, hey man, the drugs are inside me, just come inside me. I was like, what? I don't want to do any of this. I don't want whatever he's on, I don't want it. And I was like, what are you doing? What drugs are you doing? He's like, I'm on that magic chocolate. I was like, what? He was like, be careful, it's magic chocolate. I was like, I'm not worried about a Kit Kat. Just give me the Kit Kat, let's do this. And I took the chocolate thinking it was weed, and I should have known it wasn't, because when I scarfed it down, it tasted like dog shit. And how I know what dog shit tastes like, that's another story. And I took it, and immediately I started seeing some vibrant colors. I started saying things. I couldn't articulate my words. I was like, what is it? This is the craziest weed I've ever been on. And he was like, that's because it's not weed. You're on shrooms. And I was like, oh shit, I'm at a party and I don't know anybody. So for the rest of the night, I wasn't making any sense. I was talking to people. They were all looking at me like I was special. Like it was like my make-a-wish to be at this party. And I was upset. I felt bad. The next morning, I woke up and I felt so bad. I texted my friend. I said, I'm so sorry. I didn't make any sense. I hope I didn't embarrass you. I hope I didn't say anything stupid. I hope people didn't think it was my make-a-wish to be at this party. And he texted me back. He goes, oh, no, don't worry. Everyone thought you didn't speak English. I was like, I was speaking English the whole time. They're like, no, they just thought you were the foreign kid. I was like, I've been that before. I'm not worried about it. Wow. A little bit about me, I do live in Los Angeles, so I'm dating in Los Angeles, which is fun. But I don't know if I'm dating girls or if I'm just feeding girls, I have no idea. I've been going on a lot of feedings lately. Like I've been feeding this girl for about 3 years. And, it's a committed feeding. And I'm seeing the white girl, which is fun, because I get to do fun stuff like go to Utah. And it's great time. She's converting me. She's converting me into a white girl, actually. I've been drinking like 14 different milks lately. I got an Instagram for my dog. They just gave it to me. And this is how I knew I was fully converted into a white girl. I was at a coffee shop recently, and I was reading the menu, and it said Greek yogurt parfait with chia seeds. And out loud, I went, ooh, out loud. I looked down, I was wearing a romper. I was like, how did I get it? I like being here. I grew up in Georgia because my parents loved racism, and I enjoyed growing up in Georgia. I just had immigrant parents. They were very strict immigrant parents, so they'd be very excited about hearing my talk about drugs. And I had immigrant parents. I had very strict Indian parents. My mom always had a saying every time I got a report card. My mom and my dad. My dad would always say, B is for bad. Yeah. And C is for you cannot live here anymore. You have to get out. D, deported. Everybody's leaving. We're all getting out. F, find a new family. I don't know you. You're not my son. I don't know you. Very strict. Like, I tried to do cool things when I was a kid. When I was 13, I'll never forget. I asked my dad for a skateboard. I was like, hey, can I get a skateboard for my 14th birthday? I'll never forget what he said. He tried to make me a deal, because he was from India, he was still in the barter system. And he looked at me and he goes, okay, you want a skateboard? You want a skateboard? You want a skateboard? And I was like, what do you think a skateboard is? What is this? I'm not going on a marathon, I don't know what that is. And he goes, okay, how about this, okay? How about you get straight A's, okay? For the rest of your life, okay? 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 And then you don't get a skateboard, okay? How's that? It's a good deal, you don't have a choice. I had a different childhood. I never got like the sex talk, I never got like the birds and the bees. Never got that. I don't think my parents thought I was ever gonna have sex. So I don't think I never got, like my white friends would always complain and always be like, dude, it was so awkward. My mom gave me the sex talk. I was like, shut up, Kyle, at least your mom believes in you. I had a different childhood. Like, I was hanging out with one of my white friends recently, not to brag, and we were getting lunch at a cash-only restaurant. I didn't have any cash on me. And he looked at me, and he goes, you know what my dad told me when I was 13? He said, a real man always carries $40 cash on him at all times. I was like, you know what my dad told me about cash when I was 14? Nope, that was it. It's all conversation. My dad would even take my lunch money from me. Not my lunch money, but birthday money from me. I would get birthday money from my uncles and aunts, and my dad would take it from me. And one year, I built up the courage, and I asked him for the money back. I said, hey, Dad, I want that $100 back. I want to save up for a PlayStation. And I'll never forget what he said. He looked at me, and he goes, okay, you want a PlayStation? You want a PlayStation? Okay, how about this, okay? How about you go to your room, and that is your PlayStation? I got back at my dad, though. I never corrected his English, so I think I won. My dad would say stuff incorrectly all the time. I never corrected him. My favorite one was, we had a neighbor who worked at a penitentiary. He was a prison guard. But for some reason, my dad called it the penetration. I never corrected him. Anytime my dad was mad at me, you do that again, I'm going to take you to the penetration, okay? Me to the penetration, let's go right now. But I live in Los Angeles right now, so I do drugs. And I mostly smoke weed. It's legal there. Weed doesn't feel fun anymore now that it's legal, though. It kind of feels like a prescription now. I'm in line behind someone with arthritis, and a guy calling it a doobie. I don't want to do it anymore. It's not as fun. But they're doing innovative things with weed. People are smoking weed, oil, hash, dabs. Has anyone done a dab in here? A couple people, you know where you are, sir? You got a dab? Wow. Congratulations. That's amazing. I didn't know what it was. My friend was like, hey, do you want to smoke some weed? And I was like, what do you have? He was like, I have a dab. And I was like, sure, let's smoke some weed, sure. And then he pulled out a blowtorch. And I was like, I don't want to do that anymore. No, thank you. I don't want to do anything with a blowtorch. I don't trust anybody who's like, oh, you want to smoke some weed? How about some creme brulee? I got some creme brulee. I'm just gonna finish this submarine door real quick. I don't trust that person. I'll tell you guys about my favorite person I've ever met. I met my favorite person here in San Francisco. The last time I was on tour in San Francisco, I met a guy after my show, and his name was Pagimus. And I'll never forget Pagimus, because when I met him, I said, hey man, how do you spell that? Is that like P-A-D-G-E-P-A-A-D? How do you spell Pagimus? He goes, nah man, it's P-A-J-A-M-A-S. Dude, your name is Pajama, so stop that. But you know what, Pagimus? Whatever helps you sleep at night. That's cool with me. Thank you guys, that's been my time. I'm Amanda. Alright, we're ready to get the seminar started. I'm going to bring up your host and your two guests. We have an amazing panel tonight. Your first host, the host of the evening, is Mr. Mike Margulies, the founder of Psychedelic Seminars. Give it up for Mike Margulies. One more time for Mike Margulies. Our first guest of the evening is Ayelet Waldman. She's the author of A Really Good Day, How Microdosing Made a Mega Difference in My Mood, My Marriage, and My Life. She was a federal public defender and a professor at UC Berkeley Law School, where she developed and taught a course on the legal implication on the war of drugs. She's doing amazing work. Give it up for Miss Ayelet Waldman. And our final guest, I'm so excited to bring him out, is Dr. Jim Fadiman. He's a psychologist who's been involved with psychedelic research since the 1960s. He's the author of the Psychedelic Explorer's Guide, which popularized the modern wave of microdosing. And that doesn't even scratch the surface. I asked him backstage, what would you like me to introduce you as? And he said, just tell him I've been doing LSD since it's been legal. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you everybody for being here. Thank you everyone who's here in San Francisco and everyone who's watching online. Ayelet and Jim, thanks for being here.
It's a pleasure.
I'm really a big fan of stories, so I think a great way to kick us off would be, Ayelet, your personal story that you share in the beginning of the book. You know, how did you end up into microdosing?
Briefly, so I ended up out of desperation. I didn't come to microdosing through psychedelics or an interest in psychedelics. I came to microdosing through an interest in not killing myself. I have a mood disorder, and I had a very well-controlled mood disorder until I went into perimenopause, which is the period before menopause. And then the medications that I've been using on a very strict schedule to control my mood disorder, which was closely tied to my periods, just stopped working. And I explored all sorts of different medications, traditional pharmaceuticals, and nothing worked. And I was getting more and more and more desperate until I found myself, evaluating the contents of my medicine cabinet to see what would kill me most efficiently. And at that point, when you're a writer, I'm primarily a novelist, but also write nonfiction. When you're a writer, books kind of come into your house. You don't really know why, they just sort of show up. And I taught for many years, though I wasn't a professor at Bolt Hall. I taught for many years a seminar on the war on drugs and did drug policy reform work, so drug books would come into my house. And Jim's book showed up in my house. I must have bought it, I think. I'm not sure why, but I'll be honest, the first time I saw it, I was like, I'm not a psychedelic explorer, so I didn't look at it. And then somehow, fortuitously, when I needed it most, I picked it up in this period that I was so depressed and was contemplating permanent solutions to my depression. And I was reading through the book, and right away I found this chapter on microdosing, and I read it very avidly, obviously paying closest attention to the effects of microdosing on depression. And then I went online, and I found this interview with Jim in which he talked about how microdosing doesn't cause you to hallucinate. It's sub-perceptual. It's not about seeing kaleidoscopic colors. It's, in the way he recounted it was the way that one woman who had experienced it told him. She said that at the end of the day, she looked back and she thought, oh, that was a really good day. And that phrase just resonated for me because I had been all but anhedonic for months, maybe even longer, and I had not had anything approaching a really good day. And I did something that is sort of the height of chutzpah. I got in touch with Jim, and he's this incredibly generous, loving person, and he spoke to me on the phone for a long time and about what I was looking for and why I was looking. And then eventually I decided to try a 30-day experiment, microdosing with LSD, and to write a book about the experiment.
Amazing. And yeah, really awesome. And Jim, actually, there's an unlikely story you have of how that chapter ended up in the book in the first place. That was from a misunderstanding.
Well, I have to admit, everything that I have written as absolutely the necessities of microdosing are both I made it up and most of it's wrong. In other words, real science. I understood that Albert Hoffman, who lived to be 102, and at age 100 was giving several hour-long lectures, had some good ideas about health, aside from having created LSD. And I understood that he microdosed with 10 micrograms or so fairly often, and that was the secret of his excellent health. Totally wrong. He attributes his excellent health, among other things, to an inversion table every day, eggs for breakfast, and a few kind of healthy things like that. He did take very low doses, 20 or more, when he would take walks in the woods. They helped him clarify his thoughts. So it had nothing to do with what I was inventing. But I told everybody I was inventing it because Albert Hoffman had done that. So somehow it seemed to me that 10 micrograms was a good amount that would perhaps have effects, because I talked to several people who had done in that range, and they said it had good effects. So what I do is kind of what I now have called citizen science, which is called asking your friends. And a lot of my friends were happy to find out. They said, never took anything that low. So people would take 10 micrograms, and they would, as I said, they would feel better. They would have a good day. They would have no psychedelic effects, which disappointed most of them. And gradually, friends talked to friends, who talked to people they didn't know that well, to talk to people in other states. And I would start to get these reports, because that was my request. And early on, it turned out for many people that not only 10 micrograms was nice, in whatever way that means, and we'll spend time on it, I'm sure, but it seemed to have a 2-day effect, which is something which those of you who have had more than 10 micrograms, and although the lights are out, I can see you. A couple of you who came with friends, I can see you too, but you don't know why you're here. But 10 micrograms seem to have a 2-day effect. And then I realized one of the things that us high-dose explorers of many years had always neglected was the fact that a high dose had a many days effect. You know, all of you know that LSD takes 8 to 12 hours, psilocybin is 5 to 7, DMT is whoop. But we all kind of neglected what we all did call the glow, the afterglow. Now, the people doing ibogaine for getting rid of addiction, they're really clear about that afterglow is absolutely critical. But we kind of ignored it, but the fact is, when you take a psychedelic, it leaves your body fairly soon. But its effects don't leave for quite a long time. So anyway, there was 2 days, at least. So that seemed like thrifty to not take it every day. And then, since I wanted to know what the effects were, I said to people, don't take it on that third day. And they said, why? They said, because I want you to come down so you can tell the difference. And they said, what do you care? And I said, well, that's my game, is I like to find out what people experience. So I would get reports of people who were taking it on day 1, perhaps seeing it on day 2. Several people said day 2 was even better. Day 3, they would be down. And day 4, they said, whoa, yeah, I remember day 1. So I began to develop the notion that people would tell me stuff. Now, how long would people tell me stuff who were getting no benefit from it and were missing that third day from their point of view? I figured maybe a month. So I came up with a notion of, please take psychedelics, various kinds, LSD, mushrooms, etc., on that schedule for a month and let me know. And after the month is over, do whatever you want. That has been translated into, and I read it in places, the Fadiman protocol locks you into a lifetime of 1 day on, 2 days off. And the dose is limited to whatever it is you rate. That's science. And that's media. See, it's really hard for media to grab the extra sentence, which is after the month, do what's correct for your own body. That's not a very interesting sentence, so it rarely appears. But while you're here, and while you streamers are here, that's the way it was developed, which is to try and explore the space, the kind of event space of microdosing. And one of the most successful spacers is on my right, because Ayla was as interested in what was going on for her as, in general, what was going on in her life. So she started keeping these wonderful observations, and I would get these lovely little reports with little boxes, and this attitude and this behavior.
It's like OCD. You got a very neurotically constructed chart.
Researchers love OCD people. I get people that say, I'm an engineer, and then I know I'm going to get some incredible tape effects. So that's really how it started, and as you now know, it's got out of hand.
Yeah, and actually, as you alluded to, Ayla took very detailed noticing of the book actually tracks your progress of
right.
one
It's
day at a time.
constructed as that 30-day experiment. I mean, very quickly I realized, you know, I set out just to take notes on what I was experiencing. Very quickly I realized that I was actually writing a book because I gave myself the month off work, and I just said, well, write whatever you want. And so I ended up writing about the history, learning during the course of this month about the history of psychedelics, so I wrote about that. Learning about the neurochemistry of psychedelics, so I wrote about that. Learning about brain science, so I wrote about that. I knew a lot already about the war on drugs because my area of expertise was from a sort of criminal justice reform and the prosecution of the war on drugs in the United States from the very founding of the country. And I sort of wrote about that and the history of the prosecution of drugs. And short answer, it's all about race, as is everything in this country. So I wrote about that, I wrote about my marriage, I wrote about my kids, and so I ended up with this book. I always say that this book is like the book LSD wrote, because what LSD does, to put it very simply, one of the things that LSD does in your brain is it seems to cause different parts of your brain that don't normally communicate to communicate in novel ways. So this is a book that has lots and lots of pieces that wouldn't normally be in the same book, but they are integrated in novel and I think interesting ways.
I actually appreciate how you did that, how the book kind of weaves in and out between what you're personally experiencing and into the history of the drug war and psychedelic history, and it kind of gives people both a personal and a historical perspective at the same time. You kind of take people along the journey with you as you're learning about yourself, learning about the back history there. Yeah, and so how did your experience line up with others that you read in Jim's research with the transition there?
I think, I did it exactly as I took it very seriously as a protocol. For me, it was written in the book, got to do it just like Jim says. So I did the sort of 3-day protocol, and I had, well, first of all, it was kind of amazing. Jim says in his book that one should be very careful and discreet about trying to find drugs, which is very good advice. But when you're sort of a middle-aged mom, you don't have a lot of access to people. So very quickly I realized I couldn't be discreet because discretion was getting me exactly nowhere. So I started being very indiscreet about where I was going to get my drugs and asked anybody who could give me, and just anybody I could think of. And then one day, miraculously, I got this package in the mail that was it was a little package with lots of stamps on it, and the return address said Lewis Carroll. And in the package was this lovely poem and a little blue bottle with instructions for use, and it contained 5 microgram drops of LSD, very high quality LSD, I think, diluted in, I think, probably distilled water. And I tested it to make sure it really was what it said it was, because I'm not crazy. I don't just take things that come in my mail. I don't do that. Get nothing out of this event. The most important message is if you ingest it, you are obligated to test it first. Nothing that you buy on the street should be ingested by you without you making sure that it is what you think it is. And then I went on to have, like, it wasn't like I had a blissful month where all of my problems were solved, but my immediate depression resolved very quickly. And I had a really good month. I had days that I was more irritable and days that I was less irritable. I had days that I was more productive and days that I was less productive, but by and large, I experienced a kind of normalcy that I hadn't in a while.
Yeah, and so based on your personal experience and all the reports that you've gathered, and a topic we'll revisit momentarily is that these are not, of course, placebo-controlled trials and all this stuff, but based on anecdotally at least, what are some of the benefits? I know you broke it down into kind of 4 broad categories, I believe.
Did I?
Yeah, there is a chapter in the book, and I believe it was emotional, and I wrote some notes here. Let me refer to the next.
That's very impressive.
Emotion, intellect, relationships, and physical, which was the most interesting.
Well, those are the things that I was tracking. So,
yeah.
So emotionally, like I said, my depression resolved in the course of that month. In terms of my relationship, I improved my marriage dramatically. I mean, for a long time I was saying that my marriage was at risk because of my depression, and my husband points out that he wasn't going anywhere. But I had the subjective feeling that my marriage was at risk, which was as painful as if it had actually been so. Relationship?
Yeah, emotional, intellectual.
Oh, intellectual. Well, so intellectual, that's a lot of people are microdosing, we all know, because, better, stronger, faster, right? They're in this because it makes them, enhances creativity, enhances focus. I found that it did act to increase my capacity for focus in the same way that an Adderall would, or Ritalin, maybe at a lower dose, the same ability to focus, an ease of entering into that creative flow that's fairly hard to access when you're engaged in a creative endeavor where you're just kind of completely focused on what you're doing and you almost don't know what's going on around you. And then physically, and this is where I don't know. So some of the things that are physically are like sometimes I would get a stomachache. That's pretty clear. But also I had terrible pain when I started this experiment. I had frozen shoulder, which is anybody in this audience ever had frozen shoulder?
Don't raise your hand.
It's a nightmare. It's this excruciating pain in your shoulder. There's nothing wrong with your shoulder. It's completely inexplicable why, but you have this restricted range of motion and terrible, terrible pain. And during the course of this month, the frozen shoulder resolved. Now, it was probably a coincidence. It was probably just a matter of timing. Frozen shoulder does resolve. I had it for about 18 months, but it was remarkable that it was during the course of this month that I experienced that resolution. It was really, it was very hard for me to disentangle the physical, the being free from pain for the first time in 18 months, plus feeling better emotionally, plus my relationship being better, plus I wrote a whole book in a month.
Right.
So it's kind of awesome.
Yeah.
And one of the categories in her daily chart was number of words.
And and there is say there is a connection, a body-mind connection, right? So it's not necessarily, it is surprising, I think, to see some of these physical things as we think of psychedelics as these mental processes, but it's also not surprising that if you have emotional and mind benefits, that body would follow. I mean, and Jim, from your research, this isn't an isolated report, right? And again, these aren't placebo-controlled. I don't want to.
See, what's nice is this is an isolated report of which I have a couple thousand.
Okay.
I mean, you have a couple of thousand. When someone says it's an anecdote, you really just want to hurt them.
Please don't hurt me.
Because what happens in real research is you give a drug to someone and then you ask them. The difference in my work is they give themselves the drug and I ask them. So when you start counting up the anecdotes, and what you find is a lot of different physical symptoms resolve.
Yeah, there were some really interesting ones, right? Like people reported having improvements after strokes and traumatic brain injuries, cluster headaches, I don't know.
Yeah, and the nice thing is, if you look at the high-dose psychedelic literature, there's nothing. And so there's something different going on, either with the low dose itself or when you're giving a dose periodically. And I just actually got a beautiful letter from someone who had accumulated concussions over children's sports, college level, and then he was semi-pro hockey. And he finally had enough of a concussion, so he was out for about a month. And then the coach said, "You're fine, you can go back in," and he was, that day, he had another concussion. And that ended his career. Constant headaches, pain, dumbing down, a lot of things. And he had really good insurance and was in a sports league, and he did all the things that he was supposed to do and nothing helped. It's just a letter I got last week. And he said, "I took a high dose of mushrooms and for the first time felt, one, no pain, and two, as if my mind was back. And then I followed that up with microdosing. And within a month, I was again able to take on an intellectually challenging job, which he indicated was just amazing." So I wrote him back and said, "Tell me more. What's going on?" And what he said is, he's pretty well done. But he says, if I stop microdosing for a couple of months, I get some small symptoms back. So I don't want to do that. And I'm also using cannabis twice a day. And I've also done some neurological training, brainwave training. And I thought the problem with this might be a total package of an incredible way to get over traumatic brain injury. But it's going to be almost impossible in the scientific system to research it because he's doing too much stuff. And people like him are not going to say, "No, I think I'll be sure, I'll stop the thing that's one of these that seems to make my life work so you can do research." So we have, and we do have some other evidence of people without all this who have improved after strokes. And it's one of the studies I'd love to do, or particularly love to have someone in some hospital do it. But that's the kinds of things that are coming in that are hard to deal with because they're not mental. And particularly traumatic brain injury is, the way you quote, discover it is you do the autopsy. And you see the brain is damaged. Now, why is it that if a brain is literally physically damaged, that 10 micrograms of LSD every couple of days makes the symptoms go away? The paradigm hasn't been developed for that. So we're really doing edgy stuff now. And what's wonderful is if you think about it, we're sitting in a building owned by a hospital discussing how to best use illegal drugs.
law-abiding citizen, I'm an attorney. I have no interest in breaking the law. I didn't want to do it then, I certainly don't want to do it now. And what I am interested in is changing the law so that the law is an actual reflection of what harms people and what doesn't harm people. The war on drugs harms lots of people. Drugs themselves harm some people under some circumstances and don't under others. And whether or not the drug is criminalized seems to have no relationship to the extent of harm or not. So, but I am eager for there to be, I mean, the most important thing to me about this recent, and I do think that my book had something to do with this, the sort of popularization of microdosing, is the resurgence of interest in of the resurgence of interest in psychedelics altogether, is an interest in testing microdosing and in studying microdosing. And that's really what I have a lot of questions I'd like to see answered.
Yeah.
Like, I'd like to see a real analysis of long-term benefit or any long-term risk. I mean,
Right.
I want to know that. I want to know if there's any risk associated with long-term use of microdosing. I want to know whether the benefits can be, I don't know, this could be a book about a placebo effect, you know?
Right. And I think this is one of the big questions, right? Like all these benefits that are being reported. I mean, it seems like, as you said, if you have enough anecdotes, then you start to maybe say, okay, we're onto something here. But you know, to be fair, we haven't gone through like the normal placebo-controlled, double-blind, all that.
Well, we haven't because of the way that drugs are scheduled in this country makes that virtually impossible to do.
Yeah.
So we've seen, you know, we've had research now at NYU, at UCLA Harbor, at Johns Hopkins, other places around the country, specifically on psilocybin and large doses of psilocybin and tracking benefits. It started with depression and anxiety associated with the end of life. Now it's moved on to PTSD and alcohol abuse and all sorts of smoking cessation. So we're seeing this research happening, which is really, really exciting. But you know, one of the things people always ask me is why psilocybin and not LSD? So there's the logical drug to study is LSD because that's where most of the research had been done before. But LSD has too much baggage. It has too much baggage from the point of view of the culture. It has too much baggage from the point of view of the government. So psilocybin, people don't know that psilocybin are magic mushrooms. They just hear psilocybin, it sounds like a medicine to them. It's much easier to get the permits for that, and it really does come down to that. So, but I would really like to see even psilocybin microdosing studies. I think that would help answer a lot of questions that I have.
Well, there is a clever study that the Beckley Foundation is running that just recently got
A
launched.
self-blinded study.
Self-blind is how they're getting around some of the legal hurdles.
Right. So the idea is they created a protocol where you wouldn't know whether you were microdosing or not. This is to kind of attack to try to address the placebo problem. So they created a protocol for you to blind yourself so that you don't know whether you're taking a microdose of psychedelics or not. The problem is inherent in a study that like that, or like the long-term study that Jim has been doing with thousands of people involved, is you cannot control what you're giving them.
Right.
So as we all know, when something is illegal and you buy it in the black market, you don't know what you're getting. I mean, sometimes you can do your best to test, and I want you to do your best to test, but it would be great if we could give people, you know, doses appropriate to their weight, to their size, if we could track all of these things. I would feel a lot more comfortable speaking about microdosing, considering microdosing, all those things if we had that kind of research.
Yeah.
Well, fortunately, that's what's happening. I don't really call what I've done research. It's really called exploration, which is, there's this something out there, and if you sail to it, you land. But you don't know what's there. And so when I say the event space, that's what I've been filling in. You know, there's palm trees here, there's a waterfall here, there's fishing here, there's a great beach, there's some rocks. And then the next wave of people already know all that. And they run in and they say, I'm only interested in the beach. And so they do beach research. They do tightly controlled, double-blind beach research. And other people say, I'm only interested in the palm trees. And so what we're beginning to get now is the specialists are emerging who are going to do the very specialized research. And let me give you one example. I got a letter a couple of years ago that said, Dear Dr. Fadiman, I know I owe you a report, but I thought this would interest you. It was while I was microdosing for the month. And this is a woman in her 20s, she's an art historian, and she's English. She said, I had my period, and for the first time in my life, it was normal. And I think, I don't care about the rest of your report at all. But what's going on? So I wrote her back and said, how much are you taking? What are you using? You know, kind of nice sciencey questions. And what are you doing each month? And she wrote back and she said, I only took it that 1 month. Since then, my periods have been normal. You have changed my life. Thank you.
Wow.
Okay. Now, her periods had been painful and crampy and emotionally disturbing. So I thought, if that would be something people might want to research. And then, because we got a lot of database, I called my co-researcher, Sophia Korb, and said, do we have any other people with menstrual issues in our sample? It was about 1,800 people then. She said, after a few clicks on the phone, yeah, about 10. So she then looked at them, and a number of them had reported improvement. So she called someone who is a researcher in that area and said, would you be interested in looking at this data? Because we have some women who've reported great improvement and other people who haven't, and other people who take microdose now once a month, a couple of days before their period. And the researcher said, well, that's because there's a number of reasons why people have difficult menstrual periods. So that's what we're doing, is in a sense passing that on to the research people who not only know better questions, but are in the system to do the kind of research you're talking about. Now, the long-term research, that's tricky. And again, I'm sorry the house lights aren't at least on low, and magic people hiding behind the curtain if you can hear me. It would be nice to have low house lights.
They're not listening.
Yes, it would be nice.
Let there be light.
Does anyone have spark, lighters and sparklers? I'll do a little rave here. But the problem, thank you. Right, everyone can turn the flashlights off and fall on their face. Don't ever get a face. The problem that we're facing is to move this from enough people so it looks like we have a phenomenon, not a unique experience, into the research system. And the fact that the substances are hard to research because of the legal issues makes it hard, because researchers really don't want to find out that there wasn't a phenomenon. That's perfectly good research, and when you are playing the science game, you're taught that a negative result is just as good as a positive result, but everyone else in the world says, don't ever buy that bullshit. Because you don't get any credit in the world for a negative result. So we're now getting studies of creativity with normals, we're getting depression studies, and we're starting to get some of these specialized physiological studies. And that's going to move things forward. This self-blinding study seems to be predominantly to find out if it's a placebo. Okay? Now, placebo is a funny word, and it doesn't really mean what it should. The word you want is natural healing response, which is we're designed to heal. That's what we do. And anything that accelerates that is really cool. And it turns out that if you're being given a pill and you're told that it's a graduate student, you'll have less of an effect than if it's a physician, less of an effect than if it's a famous physician, less of an effect if it's a world famous physician. Same pill. What's the difference? You. Okay, so that's a big variable in these studies. And as someone wrote us, they said, I don't care if it's a placebo, I haven't felt this good in 30 years. That's worth looking at. So as an explorer, you're not worried about the double-blind issue. The double-blind was invented so you could tell the difference between two pharmaceuticals. And it dropped away because the pharmaceutical manufacturers very often found there wasn't any difference between their products, so they stopped doing it for them. And heaven forbid some of you are on antidepressants. The data on placebo and antidepressants are that antidepressants are statistically different than placebo. Statistically different means if you have a big enough sample, there's a tiny difference. They're not clinically better, which means they don't have any more effect than placebo. And they're the most bought drugs in the world.
I was used to say when I was on antidepressants that if you told me that this was a drug designed to make you fat and lose your sex drive, it had the side effect in some people of occasionally making them feel a little better. That was actually a more accurate description. An SSRI, and then they went on package.
Yeah.
I thought I was mean about SSRI.
Well, this is an interesting topic too, right? In some ways, dissatisfaction with currently available pharmaceutical medications is what leads people, including yourself, to try things like microdosing.
Absolutely. If I could go to my physician and get a legal drug that made me feel as good as I felt during the month of microdosing, of course I would do it. I don't want to be breaking the law.
Right, right. So to switch gears a little bit, I also, the topic we haven't talked about yet, of course, is the other side. We talked about some of the benefits that we've seen in mood and relationships. But what about the potential risk? And in two categories here. One category is acutely experienced negative effects, let's say.
Right.
And then there's what we maybe don't know, which is the long term.
So acute, I certainly noticed on the day that I microdosed an increased irritability. Not as irritable as I was before I was doing anything, but it definitely would heighten. I was more activated and occasionally more irritable. Stomach upset. What else has been reported to you, Jim? You probably have a long list of things.
Well, people would be happier if I had a long list, but I have a short list. The main short list is, we now recommend that if your symptom is anxiety, don't microdose. If your symptom is depression and anxiety, which seem to be pretty interwoven, it looks like for most people it's beneficial. But pure anxiety, and here's two possibilities. One is it increases your anxiety. Two is it increases your awareness of your anxiety. And those are very hard to distinguish. We also have on our site called Microdosing Psychedelics, plural.com, Microdosing Psychedelics. And if I was selling something, I'd do very well at this, but microdosingpsychedelics.com. On the site, there's a little tab about drug interactions. And we ask people, if you're on something else while you're microdosing, let us know any interaction issues. Well, we have 185 items on that list now that don't interact with microdosing, that don't seem to interfere with microdosing. That includes almost every SRI. The one we have some question about is lithium. Lithium is an incredibly strong medication. It's for people with extreme manic depression. Most people who are on it hate it because they lose their mania. They also lose their depression. I know people who literally have gone off the medication just so they could, in a sense, go crazy again. It turns out, at least with one person, that microdosing and lithium were a very bad combination. Again, we looked through our database and we actually wrote the other people, and other people on lithium had no problem. But those are that's the big drug, and that's the big not take. Now, we also, as quote researchers, and this is again because common sense, dear microdose researchers, I'm pregnant, should I microdose? Dear whoever, the general rule of thumb is, on everything, the answer is no, when you're pregnant. Is there any information about pregnancy and microdosing or pregnancy and psychedelics? Yes. There are a great many fairly important famous hippies who were created the night of their creation, so to speak, was when their parents were very young. So, but that's not good or bad evidence, that's just saying we have the faintest idea, don't do it. We also say if you are wanting to take much more than 10 micrograms, just please don't be in the study, because what we found is that high-functioning autism, Asperger's, of which the valley is filled with successful people, and a number of you, reported to us that 10 didn't do much for them, but 50 was just fine. And we basically said, we're not, that isn't the measuring world we're in. We have no quarrel with what you're doing, but we're not going to be reporting on you.
That's a weird one, right?
Well, these are people whose brains have a lot of advantages and some disadvantages. And there's some wonderful research out on MDMA and high-functioning autism, because a lot of people with high-functioning autism have difficulty with social cues. When when an eyebrow is raised halfway across the room, they don't get it. When a tone is changed, they don't get it. Sarcasm, they don't get it. So they often have hard social lives, and the formal double-blind research with high-functioning autism says MDMA really helps. It really, those films where it starts in black and white, and then one of the characters gets awakened and is in color, and other, those, that's what they report. So that's a whole other world which microdosing doesn't seem to enter into.
Yeah, it's just interesting how it doesn't have as much of an effect for people.
Well, that's what they say.
Okay, right, sure. There's another weird one too that I remember seeing in your reports, which was it was adverse reactions in people with red-green color blindness.
Oh, right, I forgot about that. If you're red-green colorblind, I love this because it's so geeky.
It's bizarre.
Okay, here we go, neuroscientists. People with red-green color blindness report when they microdose for days after they have tracers.
And that's more than one individual?
Yeah.
Interesting.
In fact, this is why I love working with Sophia. We talked about this because we had 3 or 4 of them who dropped out of our study and told us why, because they didn't like tracers. Tracers are when you see a light and then you move your eye away, but you have a little tracer. Those of you who've been to Burning Man know what I'm talking about. Okay, and those of you who haven't been to Burning Man know what I'm talking about too. Okay. Tracers usually go away with a conventional psychedelic when the conventional psychedelic goes away. Red-green, it lasts. So I said to Sophia, does this really make any sense? She said, let me call you back in a week. So we called back in a week. She said, my friend with red-green colorblindness tried it, and yes, it's tracers.
My boys are both red-green colorblind. I guess they won't be microdosing.
Well, unless, and then we have other people that say, I then went back into my files because I'd never paid much attention, but one of my early reports was a person who complained about what he said is, the light problems and with overhead lights and so forth. He didn't know the word tracer, and I hadn't paid attention. But I read his report, and he said, it really is a problem, but I really like the benefits. So it's a side effect, and one has to, as you described, antidepressants, they're great for certain things if that's what you want.
It would be really exciting to know why. I mean, it would be wonderful to have, if we could get to the root of what microdosing was doing in the brain so that we could really understand what was happening.
Well, let me actually add another word to brain. Body.
Right.
Because anybody know whether you have more neurons in your gut or in your brain? Gut. Okay? And the other thing you have in your gut is thousands of species of virus and bacteria, all not only playing out their survival issues, but affecting your mental health. So there's a whole other world that we have the faintest idea, which is what is the effect of psychedelics on your biome? And I was just reading a report by someone who's very excited by the biome and mental health, and did some research, or a lot of research papers, and the one that I'm reminded of is people who improve their biome, probiotics, biotics, and better eating. Depression went down 44%. 44% of them showed a decline in depression. That's slightly better than antidepressants, and slightly better than placebo. So we not only don't know what's going on in the brain, we don't know what's going on.
Right.
And the little bit of research about the body that's going on with psychedelics is all in the brain, predominantly because they've got this great thing that shows pretty colors when your brain changes. And we don't have the equivalent that shows, you know, the virus is all going to one side, the bacteria going to the other, and then they do this little dance with LSD, and they do a different dance with ayahuasca, and so on. We have, you know, so we're really at the beginning of a whole other way of looking at science. And the thing about microdosing is, what is it going on that affects migraines, that affects menstrual problems, that affects, you know, brain injury, and that affects creativity. It also, by the way, for lots of people, and I love when we get results that nobody particularly asked for, most people in our sample, maybe a couple hundred at least that I've looked at, report that as they have been microdosing for a month, their health habits change. Their sleep pattern improves, their eating improves. My favorite is a guy who lived on junk food. And he said, I looked at the menu and by God, I wanted the salad.
Yeah, I was really hoping I'd lose some weight, but nope. I told Jim at some point, I said, if you just figure out a way, the microdosing of your weight loss trend, you make billions.
Well, we also have someone who, several people have said, if people knew what it did for libido, you could make billions. So other than sex and eating, it also, by the way, people smoke less dope, smoke less cigarettes, drink less coffee, and have less alcohol. So if you can think of a larger group of industries who are going to want to stop psychedelics. Yeah, I love it that the alcohol industry is now buying into the cannabis industry.
Yeah.
You know, they're figuring it out. Is don't, you know, follow your customer.
Well, and is microdosing an end to make psychedelics become just kind of commodified and part of this?
I
Is
mean,
that another risk?
that's certainly something that I've noticed is, I mean, with this recent boom in psychedelics altogether, there is a kind of corporatization of, you know, if you are fond as I am of the kind of hippie history, there's a certain nostalgia that and I do think there is a kind of sort of microdosing is part of that better, faster, stronger tech world, and I think that commodification is inevitable. I mean, Jim, you were telling me you get calls from people saying, "How can I? What?"
Well, how can I invest? Are there any good investments in the space? Now, you got to know the kind of little, you know, hedge fundy world, the psychedelic, you know, the industry. So there's the cannabis space. And it turns out there are now 2 companies for profit in the psychedelic space. And one guy owns a huge piece of both of them. And they're trying to get some kind of a lock on psilocybin and get it approved for medical use. Now, the problem in the economics of psychedelics is if you give something a few times in a lifetime, that's not a good drug business. Okay? And I'm aware the chances of microdosing turning out to be the place which everyone will hate me for because it'll be commercialized seems highly likely. I don't know about the hating. I could manage without that. But I've seen it in a couple of the business magazines that couldn't care less about drugs. They're saying, gee, microdosing, you take something often enough so that if you price it at, you know, 1,000 times its manufacturing cost, you can do all right. So the question is there any way to keep commercialization out of anything that could be commercialized?
Yeah.
Shall we vote?
This is actually probably a whole topic on its own. What's going to happen now in the world where psychedelics are becoming approved, and how does capitalism interface with psychedelic medicine?
And there's a whole lot of conversation in the community
Well, that
happening
presupposes
around
there's just
that
a tremendous amount of optimism on your part. In a world where Donald Trump is president and Jeff Sessions is Attorney General, I don't see psychedelics being decriminalized anytime soon in the United States, even with all the research that we have. It's really profoundly compelling research. We may see some states, but I believe we're a ways away even from that. Although, you know, I was doing medical marijuana work for Drug Policy Alliance many years ago, 20-something years ago. And if you had told me that in 20 years we'd have ubiquitous recreational marijuana, I would have doubted that. So maybe
Maps
we're
is right on track.
Yeah, maybe.
2021 is what they're saying for
Yeah.
MDMA.
We'll see.
We'll
It'll be amazing.
It would be. But I think we probably are getting close to question time, but there is one other important topic I did related to the unknowns and the risks, actually, before we go into that. And I just wanted to touch on sort of the unknowns related to the long-term risks.
Right.
And so, and to frame this here, right, the conventional wisdom around psychedelics is that, okay, psychedelics aren't physically harmful. You can have a bad trip, but they aren't going to be physiologically harmful. Therefore, taking smaller doses also is harmful. However, with, of course, the microdosing protocol, the new factor in the equation is that you're adding frequency. So normally if you're taking, you know, typical dose of acid, you're not doing it once in 3-day cycles. But now we're adding this extra factor. Okay, I'm taking it, taking 2 days off, taking it, taking 2 days off. In particular, there's concern. I know the science around this isn't really conclusive. It's very shaky at best. But there are concerns around particularly the 5-HT2B for any science geeks out there, receptor in the heart. And regardless of the dose and output, it's that frequency of activation that people are questioning, like, hey, is this safe? So I just comments around that.
Just a wave of nostalgia of the terrible dangers of LSD, blindness, chromosomal damage. The blindness was that people who would take psychedelics would look into the sun and burn their eyeballs out. Rare. The chromosomal damage was true, as was true of aspirin and hundreds of other substances, and it has no effect on health. Chromosomes break and repair. The dangers of microdosing so far are that we don't have the faintest idea. And then people say, well, how long have people microdosed? And I say, well, the people who I know, that I know very well, 10 years and 20 years are the two that come to mind. The 20-year one just won a national award in the business area of business she's in for her company, which sells a product at 30 to 40% above the competition, and that she's recently, in the last couple of years, moved from 17 employees to 80. So if it's brain damage, it sounds pretty good. And the other person runs a $200 million a year company. So those are the two I know. But that's really anecdotal. That's genuine anecdotal.
But I would genuinely, I would like to know, I mean, look, there are 5-HTB2B, 5-HTB receptors in the heart, or receptors in the gut. I would like to know if there's, if there's one rat study out of, what is it, Finland, Russia,
Right.
and it's not a very good study, but I would like to know more about that. I would like to have that research done.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
personally don't feel comfortable doing something regularly that is so unknown. And so one of the things that I'm most interested in is more research and decriminalization so that we can have real research and that we don't criminalize people for engaging in a behavior that affects only them. And to the extent that it affects anybody outside them, I mean, it's pretty much purely positive. If you speak to the families of those people who have been driven to microdosing because of whatever needs they have.
Sitting on the street corners just hoping for a mushroom to come by.
That's kind of what I was doing, I thought, like, Berkeley, California, how hard would it be to get acid?
And I was really impressed she had trouble.
I know. And both, and since then, it's so funny because Jim warned me about this when you published
self-published book is that whenever I do an event or whenever anybody reads my book, I get two kinds of questions primarily, which is a good segue. I get, can you get me drugs? And let me tell you about my acid trip. And I don't like either of those questions.
Neither of those here. We can't get you drugs, and please don't get on the microphone telling us about your acid trip. But yeah, I think we can open it up to questions now.
Should we raise the lights?
Yeah, can we raise the lights a little bit? Alan, are you around to do the microphone? And while we're getting sorted for that, other guidelines for questions. I just want to remind everybody what a question is. So, for those of you who don't know, a question usually ends in a question mark. And usually has an inflection of your voice at the end of it. So make sure that if you're coming up here, you're asking a question. All right.
And remember, the other part is, no, you don't need to preface your question by saying, first I got to tell you about my trip. And it is wonderful that I now know there are people in the back. I have no idea if there are any people in the front. But we're hoping for more lights.
So your one last question is line forming over here.
Everyone in the back that has their hand up, just go ahead and start a line right here. Just jump into this line.
It's a line over here.
And yeah, then we'll have the line go this way and just kneel down.
And if your question is really short, we can answer a lot more.
If you're not admitting it,
Yeah, just to produce for folks.
all
Why
right.
don't we start?
And if you're watching online, we're going to take questions from the live stream as well. If you're tweeting with hashtag PsychSems, DSYCHSEMS, tweet some questions and we'll take the best ones. If Elizabeth's around checking on those.
I wanna start off by asking where you think that psychedelics rank in the most important items that can help us transcend our ego and progress forward collectively as a civilization.
Did you ask them because you're planning on slipping Donald Trump a Mickey? Take it away.
I actually didn't get the question.
Where does psychedelics rank
In how we can best transcend our egos and progress forward as a civilization.
Oh. I mean, if I were an alcoholic, if I was selling beer, I'd say, there's these wonderful beer ads that say, more beer, more ears, something like that. I think psychedelics are wonderful for people that don't like meditation. And I think for people who like meditation, they're also
a lifetime of magnificent books. That's my favorite. Okay, let's go.
All right.
Hi, thank you for coming tonight. My question is just, if there's a crossroad between unbounded optimism and realism, where does that crossroad meet in the future for you regarding this kind of psychedelic unfoldment right now?
Well, for me, it meets in my middle of the night frantic emails to Jim about whether he thinks there's anything to these studies that show harm or these studies that show dramatic benefit. No, I think I think we probably have slightly different answers to that. I am excited by the interest. I am a little bit, I'm a little bit trepidatious as well, and I'm eager for more research.
I am pretty much done with exploration, which is, there's the island, go to it. And the kind of research that I hope we do is the kind of research that produces results that people can use. And that's, I know, kind of simple-minded and cliche-filled. But here's what we're doing, being Sophia and I. We've kind of handled the problem of, do people gain benefits and do they tell us? Because people who don't get anything out of it are less likely to write. So we have an obviously skewed sample. But our skewed sample at the moment is from 59 countries. So one of the things we know is it's possible to get psychedelics everywhere.
Or at least in 59 countries.
At least in 59 countries, right. And a lot of people send us things that are encrypted, so we don't know. So that's people taking it for a month or less. And we have some people who've taken it months and months and months, and if you want to know about them, they're a very unusual group. But we're now doing, we're doing our final bit of research, which is we're writing to the, I think it's like 8,000 people who have written us, either taken microdoses and told us, taken microdoses and not told us, or not done anything. And we're asking them for simple little one-page fill in the blanks of did you benefit or not, and here are the following 15 areas. So we're doing the long-term study that no one else really can do, because the other studies that are starting, where we started, with people who have either no experience or have never written it down. So we're trying to make that next step more visible more quickly, so that the questions of whether it's useful or not and where and how can be moved that much faster. So we're doing a kind of extra exploration, and then we're both getting out of business. So that's where it's moving. The question of optimism and such is, since my first LSD experience, let me tell you about my trip. It is not being optimistic to recognize the essential unity of human beings, animals, plants, and minerals.
Yeah.
But it sure changes your worldview when you realize that. And you are much less likely to destroy something that is part of you. And that seems to me a good idea. And the way I say it is, I've never met anyone who says, I'm going to take a hammer and beat this bastard to death. Because it's your thumb. It's yours. When you realize that you're part of everyone else, you don't want to hit anyone else's thumb either. And when you realize that all living things are in the same thing. Alan Watts used to say, your body does not end at your fingertips. So it isn't a question of optimism, it's a question of the people who realize that seem to live differently than people who don't. And I'd like there to be more people who live that way. And that's about as political as I get, and I agree 1,000% with every political statement that she says.
Yeah, I was just prompted by you brought up the commercialization and some concerns about it, and so I was just prompted to ask that last question I did, to hear how you think access and other aspects are going to be best set in the near future. That if you would want to expand upon that, because you made it sound like commercialization in general is bad. In my mind, there's an aspect of just accessing.
I don't think we're saying commercialization is necessarily bad. I think we're saying that it can lead to, it can sometimes lead to troubling consequences. But that, I don't think, neither of us is in the business. So I think you have to ask someone who's in the business that question.
Somebody selling something for something is beneficial if the person gets it at a fair price. What does it cost to get a cataract? The little lens. United States, $200. India, $2. Same equipment. Okay? So the question of commercialization is probably the problem that I think we're all anticipating, is that the pharmaceutical industry as an industry does not seem to have the same high ethical standards that we would like.
Thank you.
There are lots of people on.
This may be personal, I'm sorry if I'm assuming, but why'd you stop if it
It's
improved?
illegal. Only. If it were not illegal, I would not have stopped.
And would you have the same response?
If it were not illegal, she would not have stopped. If it were not illegal, I would have probably gone and had some other kind of career. So I admit that things getting legal, I feel always a little nervous, because I don't know that world terribly well in terms of the consciousness world. But one of my friends said that enlightenment one of my teachers really said enlightenment is always a crime. And what she was saying, because I didn't understand it at all, is that enlightenment allows you to see the weaknesses and difficulties in your own culture or in your own mind, in your own family, in your own religion. And so enlightenment always takes you out of being part of the system, regardless of how good the system is. So in some sense, the problem has always been for us people in the high dose world is we were political radicals whether we liked it or not. Because we were really saying the whole notion that human beings are superior makes no sense once you have a larger view. One of the things I've liked about microdosing is it has not led to any political positions at all. Really bad people can microdose, and they will probably stay healthy or bad. So it's like I'm free from a certain set of issues that I find personally very important, but professionally at the moment, no.
All right. Hey, so we touched on this for just a second, and I was hoping to expand just a little bit. The idea of how many neurotransmitters are now found to be made in the gut, the lion's share of serotonin and sometimes dopamine, I guess. I'm curious about any kind of interaction with either neurotransmitter receptors or neurotransmitters themselves, modulation.
Yep. Me too. Again, one of the problems is you have to have somebody who studies neurotransmitters who wants to work with these little doses when the payoff is obviously easy in the high doses. But recently in a psychedelic psychiatry conference in Stockholm, I think last week, someone presented that the same activation of certain 5-2A and some other parts of the brain that occur at higher doses occur at doses down to, not microdoses, but to around 25 mics. So the chances are that the same general effects, at least in the brain, are not dissimilar. And so the question that raises is, how about when it happens more often? And the answer is, we would love to know, and our little 5,000 person group will help. But I should let you know something that you probably don't want to know. Have any of you taken a medication for more than 6 months? Any medication for more than 6 months in your life? Okay. Do you know how many studies are done by pharmaceutical companies that last longer than 6 months? Think less. Whatever number you have. So we have incredibly little data on the long-term effects of anything unless it starts to show up harming enough people so that people notice.
That's a really good point.
Yeah, very good point.
So one of the nice things is if we do citizen science and we say, everyone who's taken psychedelics for more than 20 years, could you fill out a form? We could really do some wonderful research pretty fast.
Yeah, tens of millions of people.
Yeah, let me mention the tons of millions, because it's actually not a ton, but it's millions. Since LSD was made illegal, this is the U.S. government figures, which you've got to be conservative, because they're asking you to fill out a form of what are the illegal things you've done over the past month. And you're in high school. Since LSD has become illegal, 26 million Americans, just Americans, have taken just LSD. Now, my guess is that if I did the demographics of kind of literacy and education and power, that there'd be a higher percentage of people in that more educated, more powerful, more wealthy colors in the LSD group than in the less educated group. So that if we then look at what are the people in the United States that were to use psychedelics, and why has there been so little pushback in the federal government, is because the chances of the people in the federal government that are interested in these things, having been like you, is quite large. So we're dealing with a remarkable shift in the culture, which is, it's really hard to think of a counterculture group that relates to psychedelics, since they're pervasive throughout the educated part of the culture. So things are happening quietly. Remember what happened in various places when marijuana became legal? Use did not go up.
So the question I have is regarding some experiments you, Dr. Fadiman, did in the 60s, was regarding the use of LSD as a problem-solving catalyst. To give LSD to someone had been focused specifically on one problem-solving area.
Oh, problem solved, yes.
And the question I have for you is like, has there been any progress in this area for the past years? And anecdotally,
Yes.
how much success have you seen? How many success have you
Okay.
had?
In the 60s, there was one study done using 100 micrograms or 200 milligrams of mescaline for problem solving, hard-edge scientific problem solving. Physics, chemistry, circuit design, architecture. I happen to run most of that study, so I know. And 48 problems, 44 solutions. Pretty good. Because you couldn't get into the study unless you had failed on the problem for over 3 months. So that's what he's referring to. What happened with that? Well, the government, actually that was when the government stopped us. We got a letter one day which said, as of the receipt of this letter, your research, your experimental exemption to your research is over. We had 4 people in our little treatment room who were with eye shades and music, and they were about to get into solving their problems. The government just said, your research is over. Now, I committed a crime. I said, I was the youngest person there, so I could do this. I said, I think we got the letter tomorrow. So what happened to that research is a number of people over the years have said to me, I'd like to replicate your research, some people in England, some commercial people, and it hasn't been replicated in the scientific literature. But some of you are familiar with Silicon Valley, and that there are people in Silicon Valley who know that research. And there's an enormous number of companies who owe their vastly inflated stock value to, as Ken Kesey used to say, a little dab will do you. And those of you who've been to Burning Man may have wondered where some of those art projects are envisioned. And as I remember, there's one small company that phoned me once and said, we'd love to meet with you, you know, and once a month we actually get together, and would you like to meet with us then? So this was a company that kind of put microdosing onto their schedule.
Microdosing or macrodosing?
Well, I didn't push it. But again, 26 million people have used LSD, and some of them have used them for creative problem solving, and it's very helpful because, again, one is able to hold in consciousness more variables simultaneously so that one can see more of a problem. And the reason our problem solving was so successful is people had put everything into the problem. They were people being paid to solve that level of problem, and they had the answer somewhere, but they didn't have it together. So that the use of microdosing, which is very, as I read all the articles, it's incredibly popular in Silicon Valley, except that I also know it's popular in high schools in India, where I do get mail, is that it allows not better creativity, but more time focused. And that turns out to be beneficial for the people who report it. And again, the nice thing about microdosing is if it's helpful, then so far we don't know enough of its defects to say you should be too careful. But we also know if it isn't effective or pleasant or useful or beneficial, you stop. And we know that the physical substance leaves the body within a couple of hours. So inadvertently, that 3-day thing turns out to be an enormous safety valve if there is what's called tolerance, which is the buildup in the system.
Hello. I was wondering, you talked about the importance of testing your drugs, or especially LSD. I'm curious, do you have any websites or any way or any particular device to test your drugs?
The best place I think to get, that I like to send people to get, this is particularly for testing Molly, I don't know if they do LSD, but is dancesafe.org. They're terrific. They do wonderful work at raves, at parties, at electronic music festivals, and they do MDMA testing, and they provide MDMA testing kits, and I don't know what other kinds of testing kits they have, but they're best, because it's a mitzvah to buy from them. You can buy LSD testing kits on Amazon.com.
Just any suggestions on any particular one, or just?
You know, they're not going to be like as good as in a lab, but I found, I ordered the whatever one that seemed like, had the best reviews, and it worked fine for me.
They're basically, Amazon is an interesting place. One is you can get LSD testing kits. There are at least 2 companies. DanceSafe is one, and there's another. And it tests whether it's an indole, meaning an LSD-like substance, or not. And the one dangerous substance out there, which is active at the same level, microdoses, as LSD, are called N-bombs, N-BOM-DMT. General suggestion is don't. The problem is slightly more than an interesting high has a side effect of death. For that, you could wait and get some,
So
testing.
DanceSafe for Molly.
Yeah, DanceSafe has a good test.
If you go to DanceSafe, there'll be 4
Okay.
different reagent
Yeah.
kits that will test for a different spectrum. And this isn't, it's not going to tell you every substance that's in there. It's not completely foolproof, but it's at least a one step from enough to tell you.
It can rule out some of the more dangerous things.
Right.
You just have to sacrifice one of your doses.
Right.
Not a whole dose, maybe a microdose.
sliver.
Sacrifice a microdose.
Sacrifice a microdose.
Sorry, question from the internet.
Hi, yeah, I'm live tweeting the event on Twitter, and I'm asking one of the questions from social media. This is from @AChiro. This is addressed to Dr. Fadiman, but we can generalize it for everyone. Can you, Dr. Fadiman, talk about your outreach to poor people and people of color, and how you've helped their mental health challenges / trauma that are related to classism, racism, and just for some additional context, this person had tweeted, as I do my research, I'm amazed at how blasé white people are about talking about this without fear of criminal
So
repercussions.
let me do this first. So first of all, Dr. Fadiman does not do outreach. He does not give people drugs. He does not encourage people to use drugs. That would be illegal. What Dr. Fadiman does is in-reach. So people send him their reports. In my book, I speak a tremendous amount about the war on drugs and the basis of the war on drugs in this country, which has always been about race. And what's incredibly important to me that people understand is that in a very real way, this is a book of privilege. And the reason I wrote it is because I'm a person of privilege. When I was experiencing these benefits from microdosing, I realized that I was in a very unique position. I was a financially secure white woman living in the state of California. For me to write a book about my experience with using an illegal drug is a very different thing than someone in a different community, say a young man of color, for example, would not feel the same sense of security and safety writing that book. And that's why I wrote the book. I wrote the book because I felt like I had an obligation. And what I've always taught my children is that their privilege requires them to act. And you cannot, because of the myriad things you get because of your privilege, You are less obligated to take risks that people who aren't in the same positions of privilege cannot afford to take. So, so that's really what that's sort of the most important reason that I wrote the book. But I think it's also equally important to stress, and I stress this over and over again, it is dangerous in the society where Jeff Sessions is the Attorney General to blithely engage in the consumption of illegal drugs. 29 million people have done it, but it is very different to do that when you're white and when you're black, frankly. You know, the things that when you talk about what behaviors are most likely to get people arrested, there are millions of people serving time for smoking weed, you know? So I think that's the most important thing that in terms of, that, I realize your viewer was asking a question about access, but I think far more important than access when you talk about race and class on this issue in particular is risk. And so I just really want to stress that. Like I say to my son, when you're a little white kid and you smoke a joint on the streets of Berkeley, one set of consequences can happen to you. One of your friends who's black or who's brown, they can have a whole different set of consequences, and you have to be constantly cognizant of that disparity.
Yeah. Fortunately, we're still 4% of the human race. And Jeff Sessions is an even smaller percentage. Human race, okay. That's not pushing. Okay. Our survey actually didn't ask people their ethnicity or their income. And the two popular substances that people talked about were LSD and mushrooms. Now, mushrooms have a particular property, which is they do not know they are illegal. And psilocybin mushrooms grow everywhere.
It gives me such agita because I was a criminal defense attorney, and I'm always like, he doesn't encourage you to use, to find. Next question.
And she just said she'd take a bullet for me. The fact is that psychedelics have been around considerably longer than written language, meaning people using them. We're talking a lot of different plants. I was just reading actually a fascinating article that was saying, why is it that not only there are well over 150 species of mushroom that have psilocybin, but they are in different families, as if psilocybin was a solution found again and again by nature, and the article suggests it was to make insects go wee and go away. No, that seems to be an assumption. But these substances exist. The DMP people like to say, if DMT is illegal, everyone in the room is in violation since it's in their cells. So we're dealing with the laws, I think we all know, have nothing to do with anything remotely resembling science. As you pointed out, the United States laws have had a huge amount to do with race, like a lot of other covert laws. As someone has pointed out to me, the number of people using psychedelics who happen to be people of color, South America, are many, as well as a lot of people in Africa and so forth. So we're dealing with not a simple problem. We're dealing with a complicated, biosphere of psychedelics, a medical sphere of psychedelics, a legal sphere which includes psychedelics where they don't belong. And it's a mess. And individually, it's quite true. If you're the kind of person who likely isn't going to get arrested for existing or for driving, you're probably the kind of person that will not be bothered, will not be arrested for psychedelic use. That's why you're all here and not busted. Are we going to solve that by making psychedelics more legal? It will help. Certainly, you know, as marijuana has become legal, one of the things they're doing is saying, well, what about all the people who are currently either in jail or have records about marijuana? Maybe we should take that away. There's a sanity that is starting to pervade the plants that are of more interest than for, you know, for diarrhea and headaches. There's just a level of sanity that is starting to appear, and it will not appear first in the United States. Don't worry.
Yeah, I think we've got time for probably one more question.
Why don't we take another question, and then we'll take the individuals who have the questions who've been waiting so patiently in line, just jump up on the stage afterwards and answer questions individually.
And I would ask
I'll let everybody else.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And I also would ask, after we answer the last question, please just stay in your seats for a quick moment so we can say a few words at the end before shuffling, just so people next to you can hear the last thing to say. But yeah, go ahead.
Good evening, my name is Sky. Thank you so much for being here. It's an honor to be on this journey with you. So I have somewhat of a physiological question, the interaction of microdosing. With evidence supporting that psychedelics in general connect our brains and make us more receptive to information that our perception can receive, and that we can process, basically. Does that do the same to our body, such as if we're like on a juice fast, for instance? From microdosing, during that juice fast, would we absorb more of those macronutrients, just as like an example of what possibly could happen to our bodies? That's just as an example. There's so many more implications, of course.
Okay, I get the idea. For example, during a juice fast, would you absorb more microdoses more quickly or more effectively, or if you were on a ketone?
Would you absorb more?
Right. And the answer is,
Who knows?
you know the answer,
We don't know.
which is zero research, zero interest in that particular research, and zero possibility of getting it funded right now. And citizen science will have answers which you may or may not believe, which is, and those of you who want to, you know, basically people, microdosing just seems to make the system, when it's working, work better. It's kind of like water, right? What's the effect of water on your kidney? It makes the kidney work better. What's the effect on your toes? It makes your toes work better. What's the effect of too much? Bad. Okay, so we're dealing with something which may be very simple, that may just be like a vitamin. You know, take vitamin D, those of you who are into the vitamin world. Vitamin D affects like 35 different things. So probably it's okay. And if you take too much of it, it turns out very hard to do. But yes, you can take too much of it. You could probably microdose too often. You could probably do anything. There's always a way to harm yourself. And if you don't believe me, read Earwood. Where people say, well, what if you take carpet cleaner and blow it up your nose and then smoke a lot of dope? And the answer is you get really sick, and then you write a report and Earwood publishes it, and someone else says, what brand of carpet cleaner? So we're never going to have anything that is safe in the way that people fantasy something is safe. There is always risk, and Shulgin, I think, said it very nicely, is don't put anything into your body that you don't know something about.
Well, that's a great last
I would agree. So yeah, well, the rest of you guys can come up. If you enjoyed the show tonight, please consider becoming a supporter of us on Patreon. We have a table outside. Get a free T-shirt if you sign up as a supporter at $15 a month or more, and you will help us do more of this. So thank you all for being here. Thank you everybody for watching. Thank you.